Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Seddon and Laceys Comic Stash. Yes, that's right, we've done this 23 times before. Who would have thought we'd got this far?
If we did our shows at an hour length, we'd have done a day's worth of podcasting. But as we do shows at about a day's length, we've done almost a month at this point.
Pretty much. So, obviously, that there is Seddon. I am
There,
Lacey.
at that, showing off with your pointy finger again.
Got it down now.
Aye.
And this week, after last week's into Origins of DC, and thanks to our new wonderful subscription to Marvel Unlimited, we have done the same with a few Marvel characters.
Yeah, with DC, we went for the considered Trinity, didn't we? And we ummed and
Yeah,
ahed a little bit about who to go for in Marvel, and it was always going to be Spidey because I think he probably is their flagship character and probably always will be at this point. But we also went for Marvel's first family, considered, I guess, the birth of modern Marvel with the Fantastic Four, and we picked Iron Man, haven't we? Because I think in the
yep,
world that we live in at the moment, Iron Man is probably considered one of the biggest characters. Well, for the wider audience, for the non-comic book only audience, I think he probably is one of the most well-known Marvel superheroes there is. So we've done a lot.
yeah, we have hit those. Obviously, now that we have Marvel Unlimited, anyone with any suggestions of Marvel stuff, if it's on there and it's on the Unlimited, means we can read it and it's free. Well,
I
I
was
say free. It's part of the subscription.
Yeah.
So we've actually got a pantheon of stuff that we now actually have access to.
But I thought maybe like it was worth just lingering for a minute on that because I think we talked about it last week. We talked about the Prime reading and we talked about the Kindle Unlimited, which I'd got a 2 month free trial on, which has stuff from DC, Marvel, Image, etc., etc. But when we were chatting after the show, because yes, we do talk after the show. We started to we started to talk about the Marvel one and going. Do you know what? We're reading a lot of Marvel at the moment. Let's have a look and see what the app is like and see whether it's any good. And we had a little tinker, didn't we? We tried it out and we went, do you know what? This is good and it's got a lot on there. And I think it will be good for the show, but also really fun because there's loads of stuff on there I've read. There's loads of stuff on there I haven't read, and there's loads of stuff that I want to revisit. And yeah, I'm with you. Anything that people can do for suggestions. Now, one of the things I had, and I had this earlier this evening, Chris, I was trying to decide what I was going to read next on Marvel Unlimited. And my God, I just couldn't. I just couldn't decide. I kept getting series up and going, okay, yeah, that's the next read. And I go, oh, well, I'll just have a look around. And I think I ended up with about 25 that I was going to decide. And, you know, same thing as I guess any like streaming service that you get when you first get it. There's so much stuff that actually it can be quite hard to decide what it is. I was even considering getting the Renaissance Men spinny wheel out tonight to try and decide what I was going to read next. But I was ill prepared and didn't get the spinny wheel out and thought, no. And I'm glad you said about suggestions because that was kind of in my mind what I thought would be quite decent is to find out to see if anyone wanted to suggest a particular run or a particular series or something like that. But I'm really enjoying Marvel Unlimited. I don't know about you. I found it. I'm using the app on the iPad, aren't I? And you're using the website one, aren't you?
Yeah, the desktop one.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's the same as what the old Comixology one was before it went to the Kindle reader.
yeah,
So easy to use, easy to read. If you need to zoom in on stuff, it does it. You can also do the panel by panel view as well. So it sort
yeah,
of pulls it up because not so much with these in them, but I can imagine some of the early stuff is going to suffer from the same thing that the early DC stuff did, where the text was quite small
Yeah, and I guess how they printed that font, they weren't quite as strong, were they? And I think over time, those like scanned copies into digital ones, they've become a lot more pixelated, so they're not so easy to make out what the word was actually ever supposed to be.
Yeah. So, but yeah, as we'll go over when we go through the issues in a bit, really easy. My only gripe with it is the website itself is quite clunky
Yeah,
with
I found that
finding stuff.
when I was looking at or when I was on there trying to do it through the website first just to see what the browser was like, I found the search engine quite clunky, and you almost had to search for, and you get like 1,000 hits, then you had to narrow it down, then you had to narrow it down again, like you'd have to narrow it down to comic, then you'd have to narrow it down to Marvel Unlimited, and it it wasn't a hugely pleasant experience from that. But using it on the app, I will say, because it's the dedicated Marvel Unlimited app, and so you're not having to deal with the
Everything
Marvel.com
else on the
website.
website. Yeah.
It's better. I would still say that it's not my favorite interface ever. And one of the things that's a real shame for the browser is that on the app, I can create a library. So when I don't know, see an issue and I go, I want to read that later, I add it to my library, and then I can go to my library and they're all sort of sat there. And I don't seem to be able to access my library on the website, nor can I add things to my library. But one of the big bonuses I quite liked, and I guess this is where I went down the rabbit hole earlier this evening and got a bit stuck, is they do have a lot of kind of curated reading lists on there, don't they? They have
Mm.
a lot of bits and bobs where you can specifically pick, I don't know, a character, a creator. Sometimes it's like a concept, like I saw that there was a horror one and things like that, and it would lead you down a path. And obviously, the stuff they've got on Marvel Unlimited doesn't necessarily mean you'll get everything, but I quite liked that as an idea. Like, if you're stifled by having so much choice, you can't land on anything. Maybe you can do that. And even some of it had some ones where creators themselves have picked out, oh, you might fancy reading this and this, and I think that's quite a good idea. But all in all, so far, my Marvel Unlimited experience has been very good. I think I said to you, I wish there was a DC equivalent, and I know there is in the
Yes.
States, but I'm not sure whether it's long for this world, so I wouldn't want to go to the extent of getting a VPN, etc., to do it. But yeah, I hope we get a DC equivalent, because I would love to have access to all of the DC stories I haven't read are much farther and wider than my Marvel gaps. So it would be lovely to be able to do the same in the DC world.
Yes. So that being said, Seddon,
Yeah, hello.
what have you been doing in your reading corner this week?
I did at the weekend, and strangely, I was still doing some of my Kindle Unlimited stuff. I figured I might as well get my money's worth. I'm on a free trial, my free money's worth out of my Kindle Unlimited, and they had a few on there of this, and I started reading it when it came out and was actually really quite impressed with it. So I thought I'll use this opportunity to get caught up, and now I've got Marvel Unlimited because it is a Marvel book. There's even more I can do on there. But I was reading the Star Wars comics. So this
Okay.
was when Disney had bought Marvel. So all of a sudden they could mix their Star Wars characters with their Marvel Comics line, and they moved it from Dark Horse into Marvel Comics printing. And do you know what? It's this first volume I had already read, so this is kind of a reread. It's really good. I tend to not go for licensed stuff too often in comics, because I like to read either sort of fresh original characters, or sort of different genres. But these guys, they get, and it's Jason Aaron is the writer for this. They just get Star Wars right. Like, it feels
Yeah.
like I'm watching a movie made in the time when A New Hope, Empire, and Return was coming out. And of course, it has to link a lot of things in, and to a degree, you could argue that at certain points maybe it takes a few liberties and adds in stuff that probably wouldn't have happened if they made more movies in the era that it's set. But yeah, I just love it. Looks good as well, but yeah, it's just got that real Star Wars flavor to me. And I know they do quite a few issues, and there's a Darth Vader series as well, and then later on there's some spin-offs from this. There's a character called Dr. Aphra who's introduced, who gets her own series, and very recently they have restarted Star Wars from number one, but not like a reboot. They've not done that already, but like new creators come on and stuff like that. So I think I will carry on binging into the Star Wars comic universe. But it's that nice mix of two things that I love put together and it working, rather than two things I love putting together and turned into a horrible abomination that I'd never want to admit to doing. But yeah, certainly the best Star Wars stuff I've experienced outside of the original 3 movies and that Thrawn trilogy that were books. So yeah, really hats off to Marvel for doing a bang up job. Good. And that's pretty much it, because other than that, I've been reading, I've been doing my homework. So, and I've been doing my homework and looking at an app with 29,000 comics, thinking I'll look at the cover of all of them rather than reading any of them, because I can't decide which one to read.
Yeah, so the Star Wars section was one that I looked at and went, that's on my list of stuff that I need to have a gander at on Marvel Unlimited. I was like,
well, there's lots of other bits and bobs on there. Like I think they do sort of like Darth Maul series. They do a lot of limited series, so I think they play in certain points in the movies and things like that. I never got as far as touching any of that stuff. As I said, it was just this kind of main series, and the Vader spin-off. I read the first bits of that, and they get a crossover at some point. But yeah, I am quite intrigued to see what somebody. I guess it's a bit like the movie universe, isn't it? Where you had Rogue Squadron. Can't even remember.
Rogue One
and Solo, and I guess you'll probably get mixed returns on some of the spin-offs, but yeah, the original comic book, or this comic book series, has made me intrigued enough to go. I'll probably motor through, consume as much of this as I can before I get burnt out. But yeah, maybe try some of those other series that are out there.
Yes.
How about you? What have you been doing in the dank air of the room?
Most of it has been homework, because work and football and all those other joyous things that I do. But I did crack through issue 1 of Swamp Thing, the original from 72, as it was on the Comixology freebies list. Thought I'd go for a little bit something a bit darker. You know how I like my darker things.
A little bit swampy in your swampy reading corner.
Bit dank and swampy.
Yeah.
Not a massive fan. I like the character and the idea. It just didn't grab me. With it being issue 1, there is quite a bit that happens to sort of go, oh, this is what's going on. But it didn't enthrall me to sort of go, I need to go and find more of it, which surprised me because I thought it would.
It's quite revered, and I think potentially it's quite revered because of the time that it was released, and I think, like, superheroes had taken over comics at this point, and I think having something that was published by one of the big companies that leans a little bit more into the horror world, the spooky world, but isn't so far into that it would be impossible for a superhero boy to get into. I think it really did help it. I've never read this. I've read a lot of this series, like this particular volume of it, because it's the first volume. But I've read a lot of what comes a little bit later when Alan Moore takes over. And I will say the Alan Moore run on this is phenomenal. Again, pantheon of comic stories. It is in the great ones. There's so many great comic book stories that who knows, but certainly it would at least make a top 100 of mine, and probably relatively high in that top 100. But I think because I started with that, and one of the things that Alan Moore does quite early is he almost rewrites the origin. He kind of goes, here's what you've seen in the issues before, but here's what really happened. That I think it made me less inclined to go back to this stuff because this was a Bernie Wrightson, I think. Yeah, so it made me a bit less inclined. And in my head, without having read it, and hopefully you'll be able to sort of confirm or deny on this, is that it always looked to me like it was a bit more of a lean into maybe the Hammer House-esque horror, but with the United States twang to it, like a kind of equivalency.
Is a little bit hammery, that sort of Universal Monsters
Actually, yeah, that's probably more.
sort
I
of
mean, yeah,
vibe. But yeah, no, it's the first one that I was like, because I know the character and I know obviously I've seen the film and yeah, I have a bit of a reverence for the idea and the character. But yeah, didn't grab me this one.
yeah. I mean, I do think don't let it ultimately totally put you off, because I would like at some point for us to probably do. I mean, even if we just do the first trade of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, because I think you'll see probably that leap, and it isn't that much
Yeah.
later in time, let's say, but I think you see that leap from here is probably a bit more Universal Monster stuff to, oh my god, this guy's got something here, like he's got a dark
Mm.
side, and this is going to be a very different experience than what we've had before. But yeah, not one that I gravitate towards. And having said that, there's lots of Swamp Thing post Alan Moore as well, and I've dabbled in the post Alan Moore stuff, but it is one of those series that feels like it peaked there, or the character peaked there, and probably
Yeah.
no one's ever going to be able to top that. So yeah, approach with caution, I guess I'd say, on anything that isn't Alan Moore Swamp Thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, it hasn't put me off the character and the concept. It's just, I don't think I'd read the original run. I mean,
Yeah,
so you've said there about the Alan Moore period being where it thingies, like it peaks. May I look at the Alan Moore bit, but yeah, this beginning part, not so much.
yeah, and you know what? Sometimes, and I guess we'll get into this a little bit later on, because we touched on it a little bit last week with reading the Batman, the Superman, the Wonder Woman. Is um, there is such a time gap now, and probably for a lot of these characters, we've seen the origin so many times, or we've seen stuff
Yeah.
like the origin done so many times since, that it can be quite tough going back to the original incarnations. And okay, you can put your head on and go, well, it was a different time, blah, 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 but they feel so far removed, or you've just seen the story told better since. And sometimes it's hard to equate that maybe this is the first time someone told a story like that.
Yeah.
And then again,
This is
where the more stuff stands out as being really strong for me, because that stuff where when you go back, the thing that times it is probably the clothes that they're wearing, that sort of thing. We said
yeah.
this on movies when we've done the Renaissance Men podcast, is if the only thing that times it is like the graininess of the shot or the outfit they're wearing, then they've done an amazing movie, because the story and the characters have stood the test of time.
Yeah, it's visually, it's pretty. It looks good. Swamp Thing is well drawn, well designed.
Yeah,
It was just a bit meh.
yeah,
It's just what it's the first one that I've had of something other than the absolute shit show that was that Lou Ferrigno Liberator.
yeah. Well,
But that was an absolute shit show. That was bad. This wasn't bad or awful. It was just nah. It just bored.
yeah.
It just didn't grab me. It just didn't.
Ooh,
It made me go yes.
yeah. As I
Which
say, don't let it kill the idea that there isn't good runs of this character. But yeah, it doesn't sound like it's a very auspicious start. I'm just only because I was showing you the other days off the shelf. I was just doing me me Alan Moore Swamp Thing, which I have all the volumes of, but I own no other Swamp Things. So I think that says everything you need to know about my thing. I say that though, like the truth of it is actually leaping forward tons of time. When you get to the new 52, they reintroduce, because Swamp Thing goes into the Vertigo universe, and I say the Vertigo universe, that basically they let creators tell grown-up horror stories with it, and took them out of the DC universe. But when they did the new 52, one of the things they did was they integrated Hellblazer and they integrated Swamp Thing into it. And of the 52 titles that they released in the New 52, I would say that the Swamp Thing run early doors is one of the strongest. Like, it doesn't touch anywhere near the greatness of the Alan Moore stuff, but integrating that character back into a more traditional superhero universe, they do a really good job. But yeah, I think we'll cover Alan Moore at some point, and maybe when we do that, we might even have a hankering to try out some other creators who come along later. But yeah, Saga of the Swamp Thing, as it's now kind of called. I think they actually renamed it in when Moore come on. That's the Swamp Thing stuff you want to be getting your dirty little mitts on.
So we will go into our topic of the evening.
Chris, there seems to be something weird happening. There seems to be some sort of time undulation of some sort. Wait one. Wow.
Yeah, man.
We seem to have been transported in time back to a really garish version of the 60s, which I don't know whether there was a version other than a really garish version of the 60s.
Yeah, so we're here. Back in time. And we will start our look through the original three with the origins of Iron Man in Tales of Suspense 39.
And we found this, didn't we, in with the DC ones, is that you see, and you'll see below, that a lot of these well-known heroes don't start in a comic book with its own name. You know, again, we've got Tales of Suspense, we've got Amazing Fantasy. We'll get to, I guess, Fantastic Four when we get there. But yes, these characters that we know as something else later on actually start as part of anthology titles, really, don't they?
Yeah. Obviously with
we stuck with
Suspense, it ends up, that's where Cat turns up initially as well. We didn't go that far, but yeah, as a sort of what Tales of Suspense was at that time.
Well, we very much stuck with the superhero parts of the issues, didn't we? We had the other stories that come along with it, and I'll be honest, I had a little flick through them, but no, like we're focusing on the Iron Man story and obviously the Spidey one when we get to Amazing Fantasy, not the other weird, in some cases, stories that were actually coming along with it.
Yes. So this was from 1959.
Which really threw me off, because I must admit, I didn't think his introduction was that old. I thought he'd come a couple of years after the FF, so that was a surprise to me when we were prepping for the show. So my comic book knowledge was shown to be weak at that point. So I was quite amazed to see that he was actually there was a story of him beforehand.
And with this, we do see Anthony Stark, as they do like to full name him.
Before they introduce Anthony, I think it's worth mentioning that when we look at this, this is our introduction to Stan Lee written comic books, isn't it? Like we see a bit of Stan Lee in this, but yes, like the oft considered granddaddy of it all, although hotly debated in the comic world, but probably the most well-known comic book creator there is, and yeah, like this origin story is Stan Lee written, but not him and Jack Kirby, but we'll see some of that later.
Yes. So starts with Tony being a playboy and a scientist. So some things never change.
Yeah. Everyone knows women flock to scientists like it's going out of fashion.
But you have to be a millionaire playboy scientist.
Just a scientist.
Show
up with a test tube and a conical flask and women love you.
And he's invented a magnificently powerful, they call it a transistor, but he has it on a magnet.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of kind of like pish, isn't there? Like, you could never do this, and then a bit of a hurrah moment when it actually works and does things.
It pulls off a door. It pulls off some other things. It's just like, look what I can do.
The mayor in the Batman story couldn't have had that in his house with his metal doors. Still haven't got over that. Still haven't got over metal doors.
Superman may have had the metal doors. It
Oh
was
shit!
covered
Yeah,
in a
sorry,
Superman.
Superman. Yeah, sorry, Superman. Yeah, because it would make no sense. Why would Batman be knocking down a metal door? Yep, sorry, my bad.
He then goes off to Vietnam. This was the bit that surprised me because I didn't think the whole Vietnam thing was until later in the
Well,
60s.
There's some interesting use of art style and color here as well, isn't there? We said it when we read the like late 30s 40 ones of going. I was really glad to get through it without anything that I would consider problematic. I started to feel problematic towards some of this stuff very early on. The rendition of the villain was
Wong
very
Chu.
Wong Chu was very generic. Pick any Asian country villain, and rinse and repeat. And for all Stan Lee is lauded for his dialogue. I think the dialogue he ascribes to this villain is less to do with accent and more to do with something you probably would have seen in a movie of the time, rather than actually a human being who would speak like that at the time.
Yeah. Does like a wrestle though.
Yes. Yeah.
You
Big
know,
fan of dominance
big
and
fan
wrestling
of
around.
challenging every man in the village to a wrestle.
Yeah. It's how I spend my time when I'm not working or podcasting, bare chested and wrestling.
Basically, Tony's there to help the army because it's too lumbersome to get through the jungle with their weapons. So he's going to use the transistor to shrink the weapons to make them lighter, so they can get them through the jungle easier. Then what we get is a newspaper page setup with some random story in the middle of the book of the comic strip, as we should call it, which was like, I don't know if this was just what they did in them days, and that's how
I
that was
think
set
they
up.
just kind of would, almost like an intermission at the cinema that you would have got back then, where you just go, fucking hell, like, how short are your attentions? You need a break after 4 pages? This is ridiculous.
Then we go back. We see that Tony accidentally goes over a mine.
There's a really kind of weird tripwire moment, isn't there? Where you get like a good old fashioned walking human beings, and then like one panel which is his foot and the tripwire, and just go, wow, that's some clunky storytelling.
So he then has shrapnel around his heart that's going to kill him.
Yeah.
Gets captured by Wong Chu.
Yes.
And told that they can help get the shrapnel out if he makes them a weapon. Yet Tony knows that he won't last that long.
Ooh. There was a lovely moment for me, because I think in my years when I first started collecting, we were really still in the era of I would be talking to you and a speech bubble would be coming out of my mouth, but also you'd have the like more circular thought bubble which would show you what I was thinking while I was saying it. And scenes like this kind of really reminded me of it, and maybe I reminisced over it, but thought actually to a large degree they're better off without it, because yes, you kind of have Wong Chu kind of going to his assistant that you're going, we'll trick the idiot, we'll tell him this and he'll do it, and then he tells him it, and then you get the thought bubble of him going, he's lying, he'll never do this, so I need to find a way out of this. And as I say, like clunky storytelling, isn't it? Like it's kind of no stone is left unturned here. It's going to give you everything, and probably a complete lack of subtlety that you might see in later years in storytelling in comic books.
Whilst Tony's there in his dungeon, surrounded by all the weird and wonderful parts that he has.
It's a room full of iron, isn't it? Luckily, like I can now see why it's Iron Man, because they just went, build me a weapon. Here's some boxes and a load of random iron girders and things like that. That you go, why have you got a room full of iron?
There's a old philosopher or scientist that is caught by that has been caught by Wong Chu for a while.
Yeah.
Gets thrown in with Tony, who then becomes his mentor and helps him make an iron suit.
Yes, and this happens like in a couple of pages, doesn't it? One of the things, and we'll get into it as we go further, but the way they're kind of transitioning him into scientist, millionaire playboy, helping out the army with their weapons, getting into this war zone, meeting the bad guy, that all happens like relatively quickly as well. But it was like this, I almost felt like we were supposed to feel like these two were, as you say, a mentor. They had this great connection. It was like about 8 panels where it just kind of they're prisoners together, and they kind of go, well, should we find a way out of this? And oh, we're best friends. And it felt kind of weirdly unnatural that I was supposed to think that Tony gave a shit about this guy or vice versa.
And magically made a suit that would save the shrapnel going to his heart.
Yep. You know, it is. It's lucky, really, isn't it, that if you're ever taken prisoner with a medical condition, the other prisoner in there knows how to make something that no one's ever made before to save you from said medical condition. But you know, we suspend our disbeliefs to a degree, but that feels like one of the most fortuitous moments ever in the history. And I did think to myself, if I'm going to be really critical of it at this point, of going, if this guy's so bloody good at making shit, why didn't they get him to make shit rather than Tony anyway? Like, they've missed a trick here. If they just had him if they didn't put him in the room with all the good iron, if he was in a room with some shitty materials, they've really missed out here.
It was in there with cardboard.
Cardboard Man coming next year to cinema. It's going to be their next franchise.
Obviously, the suit is not powered by the arc reactor as we get nowadays. It's powered by his transistors.
Yes.
The Iron Man suit is then created, and he hides.
Well, your man sacrifices himself first, doesn't he? To kind of buy Tony a bit of time to get online.
Oh, yeah, to finish it, yeah.
Yeah, he kind of like legs it out and kind of goes, "Look, come over here, come and get us," which I thought was a lovely gesture. But again, I question their tactical thing. Like, I'd have just put Tony in his big iron suit in front of the door, and surely that would have held him off for a little while. But yeah, bless him. You know, like, he's willing to sacrifice himself to save Tony, which is a lovely gesture. Although, as I say, I think for me, if I'm honest, they didn't do enough to kind of establish why. But you know, a hero nonetheless.
So yeah, Iron Man jumps up and sort of hangs in the rafters whilst Wong Chu and his corporal comes in.
More what I expected from like Spidey rather than Iron Man. You don't think of the big lumbering Iron Man suit going, "I'll tell you what, I'll hide." But he did. And I think this one of the things that stood out for me, one of the things that I wasn't expecting to see in there, which was in there at this point, which I thought was quite clever, is Tony struggling with the suit. You know, like even being able to kind of walk a couple of steps was really problematic for him. And I thought that's more clever than I think I expected to see from a 1959 comic to go, you know, at this point I'd have thought they'd have just gone, hero gets in suit, perfect, knows how to use suit, destroys things. But I quite like that to show that it was quite difficult.
Then goes out and goes after Wong Chu, using his transistors to move stuff and magnify things around.
Yeah.
Is it me, or did this Iron Man suit look very similar to the Iron Giant?
Yes, yeah, I've no doubt
which is obviously a story around the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, like from a look perspective, and we will probably by this time I've flashed up the cover and things like that, but you'll see that this isn't like the red and gold Iron Man you're used to now. This is, and I think you do get it in the movie. This is a clunky iron coloured suit, isn't it? And not only the Iron Giant, but I think even the way they do the mask and when like the arc goes close up to the mask, it's more akin to a suit of armor than anything else, isn't it? I mean, effectively, that's it doesn't have the myriad of powers that we see in later Iron Man suits. it's primarily there to protect him and keep him alive. Although we do see when it comes to fight time that he comes up with some more creative ways of using the suit, I guess.
Yeah, so not a great deal of things happen in this sort of last few panels of the fight.
Yeah.
Just sort of blows up some barrels that he sort of uses magnets to throw stuff at
Well,
because
weirdly
he
enough,
can't catch up with Wong Chu.
before that, he comes out in like a lab coat and a hat.
Oh yes,
And I
I've
wasn't
completely forgot.
entirely
Yeah.
sure why. Because he kind of comes along, doesn't he? It's almost like Street Fighter. A challenger approaches, and then he kind of sheds said hat and coat, and then he's just there in an Iron Man suit. And I did wonder why, but I didn't wonder for too long. I just thought, oh well, someone obviously in their head thought this will look cool. And yeah, effectively goes for a bit of a wrestle with Wong Chu, doesn't he? And luzzes him about a little bit until the cunning Wong Chu sort of sends his troops after that and figures, I can leg it, which is a solid strategy. I mean, it's one that I think everyone should have in their locker if there's trouble.
Yeah. So Wong Chu gets away at the end, and Iron Man is getting his way out of the jungle, and that is where we are left with Iron Man. But we do get told that he will be back in the next issue of Tales of Suspense, and that
I think
he
you're
is,
missing a key thing again, Chris, because in the last panel he puts that coat on again and the hat so that he can walk away. Because he's like, I don't want anyone to recognise me. No one can fucking see you, mate. You're in a suit of armour, effectively, but you put a coat and a hat on around it in what we're led to believe is the jungles of Vietnam. So he's unlikely to be recognised walking around there anyway. But just a few odd bits like that. But yes, it does tease, doesn't it? It says, like don't miss more of Iron Man in the next issue. So I guess that's where the legend. This is where the legend starts from, and this is where it grows from. What did you think of it? Did you enjoy it?
See, it was an easy read, which is compared to the early DC stuff, which is said other than the Wonder Woman one, I did struggle with the reads on them. But this was in a much easier read. The token racism is a little bit, but time and place has to be taken into consideration on that. No, that would have been normal for then, and especially just after World War II and everything else, there probably still was a little bit of hate and prejudice towards
one of the things that makes it rough, I guess, but one of the reasons why you can see it do it is it makes for an easy villain, doesn't it? In the same way as like when we went back to Wonder Woman, like the Nazis were the easy villain, and again fast forward in time, and when you hit, I was going to say when you hit the Cold War, the Russians are the villains, but I guess get ready for a after that again in the near future, but like historically, people do turn to, don't they, sort of culturally either. I'd say more geographically. You have the easy win of painting the villain as the person who is considered the world villain at the time, and I think certainly back then there weren't any sensibilities to flesh them out or to suggest that anyone that was from that country wasn't also a villain. They're either downtrodden villagers or they're bastards. That's the two criteria they could be. I think, funny enough, because this one was, oh god, I've got it here. In fact, I'm going to check it to make sure I get it right. So the artist on this was Larry Lieber, and I've got to be honest. If I have come across any more Larry Lieber along the way, it's not something that's memorable. But one of the things that really stuck out for me, I think he draws a brilliant Tony Stark, or brilliant Anthony Stark, should I say?
Yeah.
The rest of the art, I think, is just kind of okay, but it's like he spent all of his time during the Anthony Stark panels. I think it looks just that looked like it was drawn now, and weirdly enough, I think because of the portrayals we've seen in later comic books and in the movies, Anthony Stark looks like what I expect his dad to look like, rather than Tony. Like he's got
Yeah,
a bit more of a grown-up air to him than I'd even expect for the Iron Man character. But yeah, I mean, art-wise, I thought it was like okay at best outside of that. But yeah, as I say, I was really impressed with his much better drawing white males than he was anything else.
yeah. So I scanned through the rest of this issue of Tales of Suspense. Art-wise, it's in keeping with
Yeah,
what the rest of Tales of Suspense was looking like. So, that was obviously where they or what their look was at the time. Um, Again, very blank backgrounds, lots of simple panels
yes, yeah,
for when stuff's happening, and then you'll get your one or two portrait shots of where they are, then back to simpler backgrounds
yeah.
with them in the foreground for stuff. But yeah, as I said, other than the token racism for the time, an easy read. Is
I
it
think
must read? Is it something everyone has to go out and read? Probably not, but it holds up. It isn't hurt by the age.
I think like when you look at like what it's doing, which is very much the Iron Man origin, isn't it? I think when you look now, I can't remember what year the Iron Man movie come out, but you're looking at jumping forward at any time in a 50-year span, and
There's
that
what
origin.
2007, I think Iron
Well,
Man one come out.
that origin's probably tweaked along the way, isn't it? It's probably modernised a bit. Like if someone was to do the origin story today, it ain't gonna be Wong Shu necessarily anymore, is it? Like
Okay.
replace that with different sort of. Um, I mean, in some
Well,
respects, maybe different countries,
well,
different wars, different things like that. But the
I was going to say in the film
fundamentals,
it's terrorists, isn't it?
yeah, the
It's your generic
fundamentals of
terrorists.
that origin have stayed the same, and I think that probably speaks to the strength of that part of the story of going. Is it essential reading? No, because it's probably been done better a lot since and been updated, so you don't necessarily need to go back to this one. But there was obviously something to this. The fact that they didn't go 5 years later. Shit, we better rewrite this origin and do a totally different one. I wonder. And maybe we'll pick this up when we go through the other two. Bearing in mind, this is 20 years on from what we were reading last episode, and I think, and possibly because this is Stan Lee written, and I think we'll get into this a bit more on the next one, the Fantastic Four is. This is certainly more wordy than what I think we were experiencing in any of the other three series, and better for it because I think they're leaning into. Obviously, Stan Lee wasn't afraid of the cost per letter to print, as
No.
maybe the DC guys were at the time. Um, uh, but there's a dark side to that as well because it is very exposition heavy, isn't it? I think you're right. I think it is an easy read, but I think, and we probably would see this if we tracked forward. So, say if we read the next 100 issues of Iron Man, I think you would start to see over time bits like that removing. So using the panel and the art more to tell the story than necessarily having to have everything explained to you. But
Yeah.
I think you can see that comics have progressed in those 20 years. I don't know whether they've progressed as much as they probably exponentially do now. So I think probably if we then read, if the next thing we read was something from the 80s, I think we'd see a much further leap forward in the storytelling. But
Yeah. Well, if you think sort of what we've already covered, that's 80s would be Killing Joke, and you look at the difference between this and that is
yeah, yeah,
vast. As I said, that's the one thing we've done a proper look at 80s
yeah.
related. The only reason I bring it up is not because we have to do my usual
Well,
Maxler
we
report.
are we are sponsored by both Killing and Jokes, so we have to mention both things per episode. But yeah, I don't feel like there was definitely progression there, but maybe not the leap that I might expect to see, because I'm working on the theory that for a lot of those 20 years, you know, there was a lot of Superman stories, Batman stories, Wonder Woman stories running out there, but I think I think there's a little bit of a germ. There's a seed of what people would consider the Marvel style in this Towers of Suspense. Not as much as I think what we're going to get into when we get into the next two, but I think where it differentiated a bit for me is I think there's a little bit more focus in these than what we saw in the DC ones around the person who is the hero. You know,
Yeah.
even in this early story, you know, like they spend a lot more time fleshing out just the fact that he's a scientist and a playboy than they did in Superman, fleshing out that he's from another planet and his parents died. You know, that's 2 panels, whereas this was about 3 pages. So I think there's a bit more kind of focus on the character that is the hero. But baby steps wise, I'm not going to say this is probably what you get tomorrow if you went into a comic shop and bought an Origin now. They don't go into the human being side that much. But yeah, decent. And the one that I thought I'd like the least, because Iron Man probably is my least favourite character of the ones we were looking at. But yeah, decent stuff. Better for me than I probably shouldn't get into betters yet, but better than both Batman and Superman for me from the previous bit.
Yeah, though I was disappointed at the lack of pipes.
there was 0 pipes. You're right, but a lot more lab coats. So you know you've got to have a balance in life, haven't you?
But you know, we're meant to sit down like gentlemen and smoke pipes. That's what Batman's told us.
The world has moved on by this point, Chris. You stand up with a lab coat on. That's how you have a conversation in the late 50s, early 60s.
So next we will go on to Fantastic Four #1.
And this was a number 1, wasn't it? This is what I guess we consider more traditionally now. This is the Fantastic Four getting an issue of its own to tell a story of its own. It's not sharing. It's not an anthology. And as I say, widely considered kind of the birth of Marvel, the publishing line that we see now and the juggernaut that it is now, because this is when they started to move away from collected editions and going, we can sell a comic book based off of a superhero, in this case, a family of superheroes, or 4 superheroes, let's say, as an entity on its own. And with that come a higher page count. Like so far, we've been used to quite short stories, hadn't we? But this one is shorter than your traditional comic now. But yeah, more pages, more bang for our buck for the 10 cents that you had to pay for it when it came out.
And I'll let you run through this one.
And so, one of the things that struck me very early doors with this is we are introduced somewhat in the middle of the story, shall we say. So you're introduced to kind of a street scene where there is a puffy cloud in the world with red Fantastic Four writing on it. And it's never really massively explained how they managed to do it. But you see what we later find out as Reed Richards in a window, and he's fired this out, and it's a signal. And this is how we are introduced to our cast of the Fantastic Four. So you see Sue Storm. I nearly gave away spoilers for the next 60 years of comics then. You see Sue Storm having a lovely cup of tea. So you don't need pipes anymore. People have tea at this point. Having a lovely cup of tea with her friend who sees this signal and kind of mentions, oh, there's this weird signal. And then she turns invisible. So you establish very much early doors, wow, there's someone who turns invisible. And invisibility, I thought, was done really well here. The invisibility is kind of done by making her more opaque, but doing a dotted line around her. So it's not like you can still see her. And there's a bit of confusion as her friend kind of goes, where's she gone? And as she's walking through the street, she seems to very clumsily be doing everything she can in her power to knock over every human being. Because she is invisible, but she could have walked around people. But no, there's just people strewn all over the street as she's barged them all down. It's that Bittersweet Symphony Verve video where he's just walking down the street crashing into people. But yeah, and then she gets a taxi, and then the taxi driver just randomly is in the car, kind of goes, oh, I think I'll just have a drive around. And then out the back of the car you hear, oh, just stop here, please. And an invisible hand tries to get her money. But yeah, they really established that like she has invisible powers. And then we leap on to meeting Ben Grimm, and Ben Grimm is in a clothes store, and he is, let's say, following a bit of the Iron Man moniker with a coat on and a hat. I'm starting to see that Stanley obviously had a thing for coats and hats, but he's bemoaning how none of the clothes will fit. But anyway, this sign goes up and he derobes, and you see him as the Thing. And this is a much more monstrous thing than I think we're used to later. Like, the Thing we're probably used to later is more of the, he looks like he's made of rocks, whereas here he looks more like he's made of orange sludge, is how I thought of it when I saw him. But again, I mean, he has to leave the store, and he just smashes the door, doesn't he? He smashes the door down, and then and then he actually bemoans how small the door is. And I thought to myself, smart ass that I am, I went, well, you fit through the door to get in there, and all you've done since is take your coat off, so you probably could have got through. But because of the way he looks, there's a big reaction in the street. People have never seen this monster terminology used in this before, and so the police start firing guns at him and things like that. So he rips open a manhole cover, goes down into the sewers, walks up the street, and again, what struck me as establishing the hero, wrecks the street and destroys a car because a car kind of hits him as he comes up out the ground. But it's not overly being shown as a sympathetic character at this point. He is a bit more, you can hear him speaking, like he's got the speech bubbles, but it is just a bit like a lumbering monster. And then we get introduced to Johnny Storm, who is shown in like a garage doing up a hot rod because he's a cool young cat with his blonde hair. And then you see that he can flame on, as we'll later find out, but you see that he is the Human Torch as he turns into fire to fly towards this signal. And so all of the guys and girls, they head
burns his car.
Well, yeah,
he's working hard on this car just to fucking burn it up as he flies off.
Well, and I again, you know, like when the strange things that strike you didn't realise, because they keep referring to Central City. So I think of, because Marvel now is very established as it takes place in New York and things like that. But obviously back then, you know, they had they made up their own cities. But yeah, an amazing moment where the mayor of Central City is somewhat annoyed because there's a flaming flying man. So they send out like fighter planes.
Yeah,
and things might have been different in the 60s, but I'm pretty sure mayors don't have an air force set up. But yeah, Johnny Storm melts all these planes, like and you know, like he sort of makes mention of, oh well, brilliant, like good news, they've all got parachutes. But yeah, just very, very strange the way they do it. Of like they're kind of being very destructive, and of course not their fault because the people don't know that they're good people, and this is the first time I guess they're experiencing superheroes like this. But yeah, some massive overreactions from people, including the heroes. But my favourite part from this, and this is why I've gone so long into this, is they send a Hunter missile after him, a Hunter missile that has a nuclear warhead on it. So the mayor of the city has access to nuclear weapons. Now, I am often worried about the state of weaponry in America, but I really hope that this is just pomp and circumstance, and they don't really let mayors have Hunter missiles to take with nuclear warheads on it. No thought to the fact that when it actually hits him and explodes, it's going to take out half of his city as well. But it's used as a vehicle. This is how we're introduced to Reed Richards and his powers, because you see some very elongated arms grab this missile out of midair to save Johnny Storm from being hit by it, and as logic will dictate, save the whole city from being destroyed by its own mayor with nuclear weaponry. Now, you would think that this is establishing the mayor as a villain. No, that just happens in this town or this city, so to say. But then we kind of get like an end part of, let's say, the first chapter where they're all in a room and they kind of, you find out they all know each other, and it's almost a ta-da. We are the Fantastic Four. And
but you missed out a bit about what he does with the said nuke. Throws it over the water, over the ocean, right. Far enough that it doesn't do any damage. Except kill all the wildlife.
Yeah, just javelins it away, because that's the safest way, isn't it? But from a story, you know, we talk about like kind of how comics have progressed. I imagine and you know, I was trying to put my mind in the frame of at the time, and I think, and why this was a success. And don't get me wrong, I clearly have some issues with some of the stuff they were doing early on, but we jumped back in time then to get their origin. And I think there probably wasn't many people doing this at the time. You know, like you probably don't. I mean, it's almost Tarantino-esque later on, isn't it? Like you chop through time. But we go back to meet the cast when they are, and I hope you like this bit. Oh yeah, there's a pipe in these scenes. So pipes are back. Reed Richards is rocking the pipe, but you find out that they're open your mind real wide, that they're going to steal a spaceship because they want to get. I mean, it's arguable, like whether they wanted to get up into space to do any good, or whether they just wanted to be the first people to go up in this spaceship. Seemed to be hotly debated when they were arguing about it in the spaceship, but almost like a family in a car. They were arguing with each other, but yeah, they go up in a spaceship, and there are cosmic rays, unexplained cosmic rays. But if we do more FF, don't worry about it. They do get explained later. This is actually a relatively big part of some of the lore of some of my favourite characters to come. But Ben, who is the pilot, is having a very hard time actually piloting said ship through cosmic rays, and you start to see impacts on the people in the ship. So Johnny starts to get very, very hot. Ben Grimm's arms start to feel very, very heavy, so he can't pilot the ship anymore. And then the ship crash lands on Earth in what was one of my most interesting panels, where it's plummeting downwards, and then all of a sudden goes horizontal and just kind of lands nicely.
That's how these things work.
yeah, that's how crashing works. But
and gravity.
but they come out of the plane, and that's when you first see Sue turn invisible. And you know, like one of the things that again I think is quite smart here is they actually reflect that they're panicky about it. They do not know what's going on, and you know, like they're not just like, oh fuck, I can turn invisible now. This is cool. Like there's a lot of kind of worry about what this is going to do to them, and you actually see a bit of turmoil amongst them because you know Ben gets very angry at Reed because of like Reed's arrogance to sort of take him up there, and you know a lot of hinting at that maybe Ben really loves Sue, whereas Sue fancies Reed. So you're establishing kind of a lot of plot line that we've yet to see in our superhero comics. But this is where the Thing turns into the Thing, and it's actually Sue who calls him a Thing, isn't it? And that's how he kind of takes the moniker, and it's quite hard. And you see Reed give him a bit of a struggle cuddle, is what I thought of it as. You know, like really wasn't going to let him go. And Johnny, once turned into Flame, copes with it the best, really, doesn't he? He's pretty much just, this is cool. I can fly. Ta-da, everyone. I'm off skis. But they do agree. They agree that actually they have got these powers and they are going to use them for the good of mankind, which is a beautiful sentiment. And maybe, again, speaks to this idea of them being a family. If they went from squabbling 1 minute to just kind of resolving it without much pomp and circumstance. And I kind of quite like that. And so at this point, I almost felt when I was reading it, like, that's my issue. We're done.
Yeah.
We're donezo's here because they've established quite a lot. But actually, no. This, in effect, is chapter 2, isn't it? And then we go on to what is reflected on the cover, which is the Fantastic Four meet the Mole Man. And the established peril is that atomic stations are disappearing, aren't they? And at certain sites, there's big monsters taking them. Now, I actually thought, would this be a villainous act in the world now? Like if someone was cleaning up the world by removing atomic stations, it probably wouldn't be frowned upon as much as it was at this time. But you see a lot of sites around the world. You see that there are lots of these stations going missing. So like the Fantastic Four basically start to monitor to go, well, if another one goes, or when we hear about another one, we'll step in. And quite conveniently, within about 3.5 seconds, then another one disappears, doesn't it? So
in African France, as
yes, and you start to see the monsters, and I mean, effectively, this one's a giant lizard. Wouldn't look out of place in a Chewits advert. Well,
yes,
I think probably a combo of the Chewits Godzilla knockoff and the Creature of the Black Lagoon. If they had a baby, I feel like that's what we got on these panels. And and through the storytelling vehicle of the explanatory panels, it tells us about the mole man, doesn't it? It's not like we get an introduction or you see him in the background. They just tell you these are under control by some dude called the mole man. So clunky a bit on the storytelling, but the Fantastic Four getting
his backstory.
well, they get in their Fantastic Four plane, which is a plane with a 4 on the side. No further explanation needed, surely.
No.
And they go to the mythical, although clearly not mythical, because they seem to find it quite easily, Monster Isle, which has been rumoured that it's an island full of monsters. Guess that's why they call it Monster Isle. And you get like a few scenes where you see like kind of freaky eyeballs, but really quickly you just get a lot of monsters, don't you? A lot of monsters attack, a lot of flying monsters, a lot of land monsters, and I know we're doing the story, but I just quickly want to touch on this point of going. This one's Jack Kirby drawn, and oh my god, with the monsters, you know it's Jack Kirby drawn. Like it's the art style that probably pervades throughout his career, the way he does it, and it was a pleasure, I think, for me to go back and see this stuff at its earliest and see him doing it, and I do think it's great. But after dispatching a couple of the monsters, they fall down a hole. Because you do, didn't you? And in the hole they meet the mole man, the mole in the hole, as I like to think of him as after this. And there is a bit of me that sort of says we cut again, I guess, to a subchapter, which is the mole man's origin, where it outlays kind of how the mole man became the mole man, and it establishes that he was pretty much shunned from society. Like you see and you see a scene where some lass kind of goes, "Well, I'd never date you. You're ugly," and some fella going, "We'll never give you a job. You're ugly," which I thought was a bit of a harsh reason to not give someone a job. And then some guy kind of going, "You're ugly. That can't be your real face." So yeah, it's very much predicated on like he's ugly, and because he was shunned by the world, he therefore then shuns the world and starts to kind of go in looking for a place where he will feel accepted. And I had a lot of sympathy for the mole man and his established origin, and I think that was again a very smart thing. We'll pick up on this in the end, but what a cracking idea! But yeah, ultimately this leads into the FF as we will know them later on, having a fight with some of the mole man's monsters. Yet again, Chewits monster shows up again, and it's not a very long fight scene. You only get a couple of panels of it, and then the FF cheese it, and the island is blown up in what looks to me like a nuclear cloud. Now, I don't necessarily think it is a nuclear cloud, but I wonder whether that was almost what they were trying to get across. But they established that it was the mole man that destroys the island. It's not Fantastic Four. They're not like, right, we're going to go over there and we're going to kill a load of monsters and we're literally going to kill them. Like, no, the mole man has destroyed the island, and much like we get with Tales of Suspense, like the story ends here, but with a promise that there'll be more to come. So FF, what did you think?
This is pretty as fuck. This is very, very pretty. And it's the first one that uses more in backgrounds than what any of the others have so far. Reed, egotistical cunt.
He is a prick, isn't he? I'm glad you noticed that.
Got that in early and kept it in. Have to beat the commies in the space race.
Yeah. And have to arrogantly beat it myself rather than going, let's contribute to this and let's let a trained professional take this up at the time it was supposed to. No, let's nick it the night before and go up ourselves.
Yes. Really loved the TV style way this is presented, where you've got that first few pages, which is obviously when they're all coming together,
Yeah.
is very beginning of a TV show before the credits. You know, your hook to come in and watch. Then you got your backstory and your preload and how we've got here, and then we're then here, and then the Mole Man bit being in two parts. Sort of, it felt very much like a TV show.
Yeah.
So it looks as though obviously the medium has been influenced by TV in a way of storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked it. Again, like you, feel sorry for the fucking Mole Man.
Yeah.
You know, he's not the bad guy that you like want to hate him for, because you know he was shunned because he didn't look like everyone else.
Yeah.
I do love that even from the very beginning, there's tension between the Fantastic Four, and the whole thing in Susan. Sort of, you could see them two liked each other, but it didn't ever was going to happen. Reed being a dick is there, and Johnny Storm just basically like, right,
just not giving a fuck, does he? He's just like, yeah,
I'm on fucking fire.
Yeah. No one can
You know,
stop
and
me.
the thing is, these characteristics have stayed with those characters, pretty much all the way through,
and it's allowed them to build on it as well, haven't it? I think establishing characteristics like this early has allowed them to progress as characters and maybe go down the worst parts of those character traits at certain points and the best parts of those character traits and somewhere in between. I mean, like for me, even in the two, I mean, we're looking at like a 2-year gap between this coming out and what we read with Tales of Suspense. You know, I said like it didn't feel like we had a massive leap forward in Tales of Suspense necessarily compared to Detective and Sensational, etc., etc. This one to me felt like a huge leap forward. Now, partially, I wondered whether it's because it had more space, because it was an issue of its own, so it wasn't limited to, let's say, a 10-page story. You could do a lot more with it, but despite my misgivings of like the mayor with the Air Force and the nukes and some strange shit where Ben Grimm seems to want to just smash everything up, and Invisible Woman wanting to push people over randomly. Although I should mention when she got the taxi, she did try to pay, so I guess they established her good side again. But I think the Mole Man being so traditionally, I guess at this point, ugly characters would be considered villains, wouldn't they? I think that was, you know, we said in the Tales of Suspense, you know, like the foreign villain, the ugly villain. But I think the fact that it took time to establish within his origin that people were really horrible to him because of that. And I think like putting in layers with the way that the Thing looks and that the Thing feels all ostracized already and different. But that actually probably plays off of how he felt because he was not loved by Sue like Reed was. I think that makes him really interesting. Yeah, Johnny's arrogance really interesting. Reed being the most intelligent but the most emotionally detached of everyone. I kind of it's more, in fact probably he's more arrogant than this than I see him for a long well in a lot of my reading years. They pull back on that and then eventually they kind of revisit that again. But yeah, like I think fleshing out these characters, fleshing out what they are there and what they are there to do, and as I say, up to and including the Mole Man, this is a dramatic difference for me in comic writing. This is the bit where, you know, we said on the last episode, can we see why these characters have lasted as long? I think this one really makes me realise why Marvel did so well, why Marvel got a foothold, why Lee and Kirby managed to create this amazing legacy, because built off the back of this. Yeah, I think what a whopper of a start. They really did hit it out of the park on this one.
Yeah, it is as I said, it's I think you can look at stuff like we have with like Civil War and even 1602 that those character traits have carried on through
Yeah,
till now.
yeah.
And the
That's a good shout on the
blueprint,
Civil War one, isn't it? Like I think the tensions that go on in the Fantastic Four during that. Okay, you can argue it's because they have different opinions, but yeah, you go right. You could read issue one of this and then go into Civil War, and okay, you might kind of go, "Wow, they look very different because the art's changed." But
yeah,
you could even from this origin go, "Oh yeah, I can see why this group of people wouldn't necessarily be on the same side, but
yeah.
actually." They have a dedication to each other that it isn't just straight away you're a prick, I'm off. Like they would actually try to stay together.
But yeah, no, and I think, as you said, I think this is really helped by the fact that it has the page count that it does.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's not 10 pages,
yeah.
15 pages at a push.
Well, I said to you, there
Of
was a number
just
of points in the issue where I just expected to turn the page, turn a digital page in this case, and it to be over because the last few weeks, the bulk of what we've done has been very, very short stories, and I kept expecting like to see the end in the corner rather than it have more to it.
but yeah, no. See, that I'm not a massive Fantastic Four fan as a general rule. This has made me go. Actually, I'd probably even go and read some more of this early run.
Funny enough, I was gonna that was gonna be my next question to you. Would you read more? Because you know when I said I was circling on what I was going to read, one of the things I'm really tempted to do is to read a massive chunk of this Lee Kerr because I've always heard how brilliant it is, and I know a lot of the story beats, but I haven't read a lot of the individual issues, and probably I'm tempted to maybe try and go, depending on how much is on Marvel Unlimited, but at least up to and past Surfer and Galactus, and maybe even longer. Like this, I think now I've kind of peeled back the surface on this thing that I thought, oh, I'll read that one day. I always thought to myself, I get like some of them Marvel Masterworks collected editions,
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm with you. I think there will be some clunky storytelling in there. There will be some bits that maybe aren't so good, but I want to read more. I want to read more of this 1961 comic because uh, I think it's good, and I think it's going to continue to be good. I expect because we know a lot of what comes afterwards. I expect that through maybe the first 50 issues of this, that they would establish this family dynamic more, these characters more, their heroism more, their struggles more, and if they treat their villains anywhere near as well as they treat the Mole Man as an establishment of a villain, like he wasn't just he's from another country. I'm in for the long haul on this. I'll be willing to put up a good chunk of time in on this.
yeah. It's a seeing that as I said earlier, I'm not a massive fan of the Fantastic Four generally, but yeah, I will probably give this 10, 12 issues,
Yeah.
this original run, see if that hooks me. If it doesn't, I might jump to a different run, maybe pick it up in the 80s or the 90s or something
Well,
like that.
there's
And
I mean, I'm probably like you. I'm probably not the biggest Fantastic Four fan in the world. It's not one that I automatically gravitate to, but I have read a few runs and a few, and I've tended to, other than when I was just binge reading everything when I was a kid. But I I would say that I've chosen what runs I one could get my hands on and two I knew were good, and there are some absolute corkers out there, and actually there is one which is I want to say I think it was it would have been 80s, maybe late 80s, early 90s. John Byrne, who is well known for being on the X-Men, he takes over the Fantastic Four, and that was the first time I loved Fantastic Four comics because I think that run is absolutely amazing, both storytelling and visually. But strange enough, for parts of it, not the family aren't always together. There are other characters that kind of get integrated, but yeah, I will be coming back for more of this, and I will happily read if we want to jump forward to something. I was going to say a little bit more modern. The 80s aren't modern, but something that is around the 80s time. Then yeah, I'd be up for reading a chunk of the John Byrne run as well, and seeing what you think of that.
Because yeah, as you've said, the ones that I'm with this original Fantastic Four run is the Galactus Silver Surfer.
Yeah, and
Bits
I think we get like
to go through those.
I quite like. I want to kind of see Doom get introduced as well, and I think we get Black Panther in somewhere in there as well. I think they established like the Black Panther as a character, so they do set a lot of DNA for characters that are there for good. But yes, yeah, 2 thumbs up for me. You said it. I don't want to go on without going a little bit back to Kirby's art. Kirby's art is, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like every panel is perfection. But I think for someone drawing in the 60s, I think he is a game changer, because I don't think people would generally, or if they were drawing monsters like he draws monsters, they were drawing it for monster comics. If you're drawing humans, you'd be drawing that for like detective or superhero ones. And I think he melds all those styles together amazingly. And as I say, it's so nice to see his character design is stuff that I know he carried on to do, like, and you know, it becomes the Kirby style. But yeah, 2 thumbs up for me. In our trip in time, I bloody love this. I think this is great.
Yes. So next we go on to Amazing Fantasy 15, which
Spidey.
is le debut of Le Spider-Man. So starts with Peter being a angry nerd loser who everyone at school doesn't like. He goes off to a science fair.
He tries to get a lass to go on a date with him to the science fair, does he? And considering we jumped out of reading Tony Stark Science Lothario, Peter Parker unfortunately doesn't kind of get the same. I'm now starting to think you might be right that millionaire part might be the key part of rather than the science part.
Yeah. We get they're doing a science experiment. Spider comes down in the middle of it, gets zapped with radiation, and bites Peter. So at this point, everything that we've seen in every time they do a different version of the film.
Yeah.
We then get him realize that he has some powers. As a car attempts to run him over as he's standing in the middle of the road,
Yeah,
he jumps, grabs onto the wall, and then climbs up the building. He then wanders across I don't know if it's meant to be a power cable or what the line was, but it wasn't a web that he's made.
Yeah,
but he crawls
crawls down a rando cable, doesn't he? That's between buildings at a very strange angle.
So does that. Is walking home and sees that there's a wrestling challenge with Crusher Hogan, not Bonesaw McGraw. Damn it.
Or Hulk Hogan.
So he goes home, makes a costume, and then has a wrestle.
He does, doesn't he? Quite a cocky little wrestling bastard as well, isn't he? Like, I believe like this would be the equivalent of Matt Jackson against the Great Khali, if done in modern times. A lumbering brute against a highly skilled, highly trained, athletic show-off.
I wouldn't really say that Khali was highly trained, but you know.
You do realise I edit. You do realise I edit this show, so any negative Bucks comments are out. It's a kind of we'll go into it a bit more, but I'll let you go on the story. But it's that kind of character establishment thing, isn't it? Is where we saw with the Fantastic Four, when they get their powers, they turn straight to and we must use them for the good of mankind. Whereas Peter Parker, Spidey at this stage, gets his powers and goes. Bearing in mind, he'd been shown as established as a good kid, but people weren't very nice to him, and grown up in a house with a very old Aunt May and Uncle Ben. I mean, they are old in the way they're drawn, aren't they? But yeah, his mind goes to how can I make that cash money very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah. He's seen in one bit where he's basically just hanging onto a pole over the ring. He then gets given a card by some carnival folk.
Ooh,
did we see this somewhere else?
Yeah, as I say, yes, felt very Wonder Woman at this point, didn't it? Of going, yeah, I'll make all the money I can out of you, super person.
So Pete goes off to make a costume.
He does a bang up job as well, doesn't he? To be fair to him, if you said to me right now, here's some superpowers, all you need to do is knock up a costume, I'd probably, the best I've got is putting my hoodie up, because I wouldn't have any idea how to make clothes. Certainly not. And again, it's an early version of the Spidey costume, but it's got the DNA of what's to come. But yeah, including somehow sewing webbing into his underarms. Like, very good. Yeah. But takes as much time to create his web shooters, so he can create this kind of modern miraculous thing. And in the same amount of time, he knocks up an outfit. But I don't want to take away from his knock up the outfit, because I do think that's amazing that he manages to knock up an outfit that quick.
An interesting bit is we actually get a little bit of info about what he does to make his web shooters. He uses a bit of wet cement in the mix.
Yes.
Which was quite novel to actually, make sense. Cement to stick. He then goes on TV doing feats of Spider-Man Wonder.
Yes.
Hanging around and off things and climbing up walls.
And don't get me wrong, I think it would be quite miraculous to see. However, they do kind of establish it, because, it is the comic book page still, but that someone just sticking to a wall would be a TV show. And I think probably if you'd have got me to read this in the 80s, the 90s maybe even, I'd have said, well, that's a bit incredulous, isn't it? But you get me to read it now and I go, yeah, fuck me. I see some of the shit they put on a Saturday night. This is probably the most exciting thing they'd show. Watch celebrities sit in a jungle eating a kangaroo bollock and people think it's brilliant. Like, someone stuck to a wall would be amazing.
We see a guy running out that the police are trying to catch, and Spidey could have done something to help, but doesn't.
And he's very blasé about it, isn't he? His attitude's very like, why would I do anything?
Cunt Spidey comes out with, why should I do anything?
He uses a beautiful "that's your job" line, which is for anyone who's ever done a job ever in their life, is the most annoying thing you can ever say to someone is, oh, it's not my job, that's your job, mate. Yeah. Absolute pure prickery.
Yeah. And at this point was where I've got in my notes, Spidey is a cunt.
Although, does he become any less cunty? Because the next couple of panels we see, he's now suddenly started to wear his shirt unbuttoned at the top. So he's clearly progressed as a character, because he now, I was going to say shows off a bit of chest hair, but I think there's a vest underneath, so he's not gone too far.
We see him going home, and Uncle Ben has died.
Yes.
Brutally murdered. Gets told, policing in these days.
Yep, I'm glad you picked up on this. It was like, your uncle is dead, and the person who did it is in a building over there. You wouldn't tell people that now, would you? Or you probably wouldn't then, let's be honest. But
so we know where the murderer is. We're still over here. We're not doing anything about it, but we'll tell you where he is.
Yeah.
He's over at the docks.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck's sake. So we then see the police around said building in the docks, where they won't do anything because he has the higher ground.
Yeah.
So that's where Star Wars got it from.
Yeah. I think it's in
Can't fight,
Sun
got the high
Tzu's
ground.
Sun Tzu's Art of War, I think, and this robber. Those two establish this technique as a legitimate technique for defending a base or yourself.
So Spidey makes his way in, realizes that the guy who it is.
Ooh, before we go on to
Yes.
what happens next, what do you reckon Spidey was going to do? And I know he does some stuff, but like an angry Peter Parker with superpowers, do we think he was going there just to stop him, or do we think he was going there to do him in?
He was going to do him in, clearly.
Because that's what I felt like as well. I felt like he was going to go and kill him.
So,
but I don't know whether that's just our modern murderous sensibilities being thrown onto a 60s background.
So he turns up, realizes that the guy who murdered Uncle Ben was the guy he could have stopped a few days ago.
Yeah.
But his ego and arseholeness, cuntiveness stopped it. We get a very interesting panel where they draw Spider-Man with pupils.
Yes. That was weird, wasn't it?
Yes. Not sure I like that.
The Spidey eyes. The Spidey eyes. That was very odd.
So he beats him, ties him up with a web, and hangs him out for the police to get rid. And we then get the first of many a times that we hear this: with great power comes great responsibility.
And you get like kind of the realization for Spidey, don't you? And you see him cry. But I want to make sure for those that haven't read it, he's taking his mask off when he cries. You're not seeing it come out of the weird, tiny pupils inside his mask, because that would be even freakier. I mean, it's comparatively to Fantastic Four. I think there's a bit more storyline wise of they had a story to tell, didn't they? So
yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm sure when they did this, they hoped that Spider-Man would become very popular, but I think there's much more of a singular moral tale to this as well, isn't there? Like it has the, well, it's the build up to the with great power comes great responsibility, but like a mistreated kid getting a bit of power, getting a bit carried away with it, maybe forgetting that code that he had and having to face a harsh or possibly the harshest lesson to re-establish that moral code. And I think that's where it probably differs from the Fantastic Four for me, because the Fantastic Four, I think they just went, right, we're doing a series called the Fantastic Four, superheroes, go. Whereas this had to maybe stay in that story structure a little bit more. But I quite liked it. I think like you, they paint Spidey, I think, a lot less sympathetic in parts of this story than you tend to see him in his origins. Okay, most of the origin stories you see, there is that moment where he doesn't stop the robber and Uncle Ben gets died. But I think it tends to be, it feels like in a lot of the other ones, it's shown as his one misstep, whereas I think they're establishing him as a bit of a prick at that point anyway, in this, and that actually it wasn't one mistake. He'd have done it again the next night as well, and he'd have carried on doing it until someone killed his family.
Yeah, it's the thing with Pete in this. First, I will say is how he's drawn as Peter is really plain and
got a very oblong head as well.
Yeah,
really oblong head,
and he's just comes across as like an angry nerd.
Yeah,
obviously we not a term that would have been used at that point, but he's just like your sort of angry nerd that's just angry at the world because he isn't the popular kid in school. And
I mean, outside of the clothes that he wears, I think you're right. They actually, like, character design, he looks different, doesn't he? The popular girls and the Flash. Flash Thompson is establishing this. They're all drawn in what I would say a more traditional, what I would expect to see in 60s comics portrayals of teens, and he's almost drawn Benjamin Button style. You almost feel like he's an old man in a small. In a small height body, and he looks out of place. So you know, like I think character-wise, they are every origin story you see that they establish him as a bit of an outsider, a bit of a loner, a bit of a geek, whichever era you're doing it in. But in this, I think it was a lot more of a physical portrayal of him being different.
Yeah, and yeah, he, as I said, he is just a bit of a cunt,
Yeah.
and you have, or I anyway, I had zero sympathy for him.
No, I mean, like, not that he
And
goes over the top with like May and Ben, and I say May and Ben. There's not really much establishment of May in this, but um, I felt really bad for him before they died because I think they were portrayed as like doting on this good kid,
yeah,
and I'm not saying he's like a modern day bastard, but he didn't really seem to care that much until one of them died.
yeah,
But I mean, maybe the truth of it is that that's a bit unfair because I'm doing that with the age I have on my shoulders now, and I think if you ask 14, 15-year-old me how much I cared about anyone in my life that was considered my family, I'd be like, piss off, I'm going to play football. Stop talking to me, that sort of thing. So maybe that is a realistic portrayal of it. But yeah, I don't. He doesn't he he doesn't come across as a good guy to me,
no,
even when he's the picked on nerd. He's not kind of established necessarily as like, you don't see that scene where he goes, "Oh, you know, it's fine. It doesn't matter that they don't like me," and that sort of thing. Yeah, angry nerd, I think, is a really good descriptor. I think that he comes across as a bitter, angry kid. Then he gets some power, tries to make all the cash he can, which I'm not saying that's a wrong thing, but obviously it's not something we normally see established for our heroes unless you're Wonder Woman. And then doesn't do something heroic that he should have done, and that leads to the death of someone in his family. And of course, we know the Spidey law that comes after that. And I think probably this is one where it's what is built after this that makes it great. But and again, I think it's a good origin, but I don't think Peter Parker and Spidey becomes the Peter Parker and Spidey that he is now,
no,
unless they do what they end up doing in the early parts of the Amazing Spider-Man one, which is probably kind of re-establish him a bit more as a good kid and a hero. Whereas I think if you just had this
yeah,
one story, you'd probably go away and go, well, you know, maybe he does turn things around, but also equally, maybe a couple of days' time he forgets about his dead uncle and becomes a prick again.
yeah. Obviously, the origin part of it works. You know, the spider
Yeah,
bite, how it happens. You know, the wrestling, because that gets, you know, brought up lots of times in all the ones as
yeah,
well. So, you know, pretty much everything in this, or in this original issue, is what is, you know,
yeah,
DNA and canon, and is always told the same way and retold the same way.
yeah.
Um,
Again, 60 years later, you know, like it's the same.
Toby
People might have
Maguire's
embellished. Yeah,
fighting Macho Man
yeah. And, you know, like
as
people might
Bonesaw
have
McGraw.
added wrinkles and nuance into it, but that base thing of nerdy kid gets bitten by a radioactive spider, has a cheeky wrestle, doesn't stop a villain, someone close to him dies. Yeah, that's been kept, hasn't it, for forevermore.
Yeah, I mean, what they've done better since this is obviously establish him with a bit of a sympathy
Yeah,
on
I
him a
had
bit more than what this does.
I had a lot more sympathy for the Mole Man in Fantastic Four 1 than I did Peter.
Yeah.
And yeah. And
So, like we did last time,
yes.
we shall rank them. But then what we
Yes.
will also do is do versus a Batman
Yeah.
versus DC versus Marvel.
Yep. I'm up for
So,
that.
where do you rank these, Mr. Said?
So for me, the weakest is Iron Man, Tales of Suspense. I think it had the least page count, and probably the fact that it did come out in '59 Probably this was them finding their feet in doing origin stories. Then it would be Spidey. I think it's good because I think the idea of the origin is good because it's held for so long. But yes, I think for me it's the one where God, they need to do a lot of work after this to get Peter where he is. And number one for me by a long way is the Fantastic Four. Not without its faults, but fantastic. And when I think that this was conceived, written, and drawn 60 years ago, it really wowed me that it was as good as it is.
Yeah, same order for me. Iron Man, then Spider Man, then Fantastic Four. Pretty much the same things as you said. Thanks to Iron Man, you got where they were or how they were planning on doing Origins. Spider Man was an improvement on it, and then with Fantastic Four, this is the first time we've had something and let it breathe.
We said about this with the FF, so I meant to say it on Spidey. After reading this, would you want to read more Spidey from this era?
Not in this short form. So if he just turns up in loads of just amazing fantasies,
I think he pretty much
not.
kicks into Amazing Spider-Man as a monthly after this. So I think you go much more to that length and format of Fantastic Four after this.
So I would probably give them a bit of a go. In a short form, I don't think there's enough to work with in that sort of 10-page count story. I mean, if you're going to do something, I think you need a bit more.
I think because we know everything that comes out. Or I say everything, we know what comes afterwards. I would, and in the same way as I said with FF, I am going to hunt down the early Spidey stuff because it's always been on my list of things to read. But again, they're prohibitively cost. You couldn't go and buy the issues, and the collected editions. Well, to be honest, there's so much shit coming out that I've never kind of got around to getting it. But now that they'll be accessible to me. And I think I will do a similar thing with Spidey as I will with the FF. I'll probably just run through as many issues as I can until such a time as I kind of burn out or anything like that. But I would say where it slightly differs for me is, so with the FF, I want to see what happens next because I think they did a good enough job for me to go, yeah, I want to see what happens next. Whereas Spidey, I think I want to see what happens next because I know that Peter Parker is who Peter Parker is, and I don't see it much in this. So my wanting to read more Spidey is almost that intrigue of going, at what point do they get him right? But yes, so slightly different. But yeah, I think I will be tapping into some Spidey.
So versus mode. Thinking back with all 6, we both put Spider-Man or Superman as the bottom of the last lot. Is that better than Tales of Suspense?
Do you know what? I think I'd still have Spidey at the bottom for me. Superman, sorry, at the bottom. Yeah. I think Tales of Suspense is stronger for me. I think there's just more substance there with the slightly problematic villain even in tow. But yeah, I think I would keep Tales over Superman.
What about Detective Comics, the Batman?
This is quite a tough one because I quite liked that detective. Obviously, it's light years away from, or light years apart from what ultimately we end up getting. But again, I think limited amount of pages, and they're almost establishing the mystery element of the detective side of it in Detective Comics.
Yeah.
So I actually think, I would. This would be my break point. I think I would slot in Tales of Suspense, despite it being written 20 years later. I think I would slot Detective and Batman over the top of Tales of Suspense. I think it's albeit simpler. But I'm more interested in what happened to Batman next than what happened to Iron Man next.
Yeah, I concur on that one. Even though I struggled with that origin Batman one. I Yeah, Superman would in the bin at this point
Yeah,
because
yeah.
those early Superman did not do anything for me. What about Wonder Woman? Where would Wonder
See,
Woman sit in the pantheon?
see, Wonder Woman. Like I think, like in a similar to me with Detective, but I think to be honest, Spidey and Fantastic Four, like there'd be a gap between uh, Detective and Sensation Comics to Amazing Fantasy. Amazing Fantasy beats them by a chunk for me, and then Fantastic Four beats that by a chunk. But I think that yeah, Amazing Fantasy and Fantastic Four are much more enjoyable, and I think as a storytelling craft, I think you start to really see the jump forward here, and they're different class to what they were pumping out in the late 30s, early 40s. So yeah, much better for me.
Yeah, I would probably put Sensation and Fantasy a little bit closer than you do, but the difference between Fantastic Four and the rest is
Yeah,
night and day.
yeah,
So yeah, surprisingly, for me at least, because it was the one that had the least interest in going in. My favorite has is of these original six that we've done is Fantastic Four.
yeah, yeah. I think it's uh, head and shoulders above all the rest for me. And yeah, as I say, I think this is the thing that established Marvel Comics. You know, like this sold whatever it sold, and maybe gave them the confidence. But people come back for a second issue. But um, I don't think there's a Marvel Comics without this. I think they just do a great story here, and I think kid me reading this would have been yeah, I want more of this, and I think it does that better than any of the others.
And well worth your 10 cents.
Oh god, yeah, yeah. And strangely enough, cheaper than your Amazing Fantasy and your Towers of Suspense. But I'm guessing because they were anthology titles, they probably had a higher page count, but you were getting less chunks per story. So
Yeah.
yeah, Fantastic Four, not only the best, but the best value. God knows what you could buy with that other 2 cents back then, but probably a house.
At least a car.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or a gun. It was America.
So I hope you've enjoyed this look into history that we've done over the past couple of weeks.
And do you know
Um,
what, Chris? I think we might dust off the time machine every now and again, might we? Like, I think what potentially would be quite interesting, but we'll probably again keep it in mothballs for a little while. But I quite like the idea of maybe at some point if we can get some um, maybe some Origin or some DC stuff from the '60s to do a kind of comparison to Marvel in the '60s, and then maybe jump forward to the '70s, the '80s, and yeah, maybe we'll make this a regular time machine journey through the history of comics to see how comics progressed over the decades.
I like this.
And it means I can do
Yes.
more backdrops. That's the only reason why I want to do it.
So yes, again, as we said earlier, obviously now that we have Marvel Unlimited, um, if there's any, so we're looking probably now looking at sort of 70s and 80s start points.
Yeah.
But if there's anyone that you think would be an interesting one of looking at and going, if you're going to do a start point for that decade, try this
Yeah.
guy. These started then,
Or
because obviously
or
one of the ones
something.
that say for 70s would be like a Luke Cage or something like
Yes,
that.
please. That's what was
Because
exactly what went through my head when I said
you know,
'70s. I was like, I'd love to get some Luke Cage
a bit
going.
of black exploitation.
Yeah, yeah,
And yes, we know that it probably will be a bit morally ambiguous. in this day and age,
Yeah.
but it's of its time.
Oh, but the thing is, I mean, maybe it might surprise us because it might not be. Like maybe it's much more progressive than I would think a comic book from the 1970s would be. An interesting exercise, but yeah, that's one of the ones that when I thought 70s, I thought yes, but yeah, I think like for anything that you guys like put into us, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that you've read. It might be something that you're just interested in, and we'll read it vicariously for you and tell you whether to have a go or not.
But yeah, so as always, like, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that YouTubey stuff. No idea what we're doing next week.
No,
Because like most weeks, we've got a list of stuff. We haven't decided what it is we're doing off that list yet.
yeah, and
But
like some of our planning time is taken up by having to re-establish the flux capacitor after every time travel to make sure that we get back.
because I need it back for 20 years ago for wrestling.
Exactly. In fact, you are pretty much the king of time traveling podcasts, aren't you? I hadn't even twigged that when we started doing this. So yes, you are the master of time.
I'm a Time Lord.
It could be, yeah, yeah. And I'm your assistant. I am the Billy Piper to your David Tennant. That was the Billy Piper years, wasn't it?
Don't watch Doctor Who.
I'm gonna go. Yes, yes, it is.
Yes.
I just want to be your Billy Piper.
And until next time, obviously keep an eye on the channel. We have the big show every Friday, the Renaissance Men, where we chat all sorts of shit about all sorts of shit.
Yep.
Films, TV, games,
Wrestling.
bird news. We also have Seddon doing his ECW, TEW, save.
Trying to do what Paul Heyman failed to do, which is keep ECW alive.
We have Renaissance Reacts, where we do reactions to music, which is a new thing that we've started recently.
New fun thing. We loves it.
New fun things. Egg and Little Egg doing gaming, and also Stu's gaming sessions where he's on his Todd and doesn't have.
I'm kind of hoping, and this might age this show a bit, but I'm kind of hoping that he does a stream of Elden Ring, because the emotional turmoil I've seen that boy go through on WhatsApp, from loving it to hating it to wanting to throw his PS5 out the window and things like that, I think it would make for a hilarious stream.
Yes. And also, other things on the channel is your pop videos making a return
soon,
and Jimmy with his Star Trek Picard series.
Yeah, which should be live now. In when this releases, but we don't know what it's called yet because it's not actually happened yet. But yeah, give him some support because it's his first solo endeavor, or his first outside the Renaissance Men endeavor, or the Galaxy Head. So yeah, give the boy a lot of support. He's a good lad.
And until next time, be good to each other. Be nice.
Don't be Peter Parker. Yeah.
Don't be like Peter Parker. Don't be a
like
cunt.
Peter Parker. He's a prick.
And goodbye.